wanted to show you, first of all, just kind of supplies I have for today is super simple. I'm just using, in fact, a pretty cheap sketchbook I have here with just some blank sketch paper in it. You could use printer paper. Anything is fine today. I'm not using anything fancy. In fact, when I sketch a lot, I just like my paper to be nice and simple because, yeah, it's just easy. And then as far as pencils go, I just have some regular old, these are just from Target actually, just #2 pencils. And then I do have, if you've been in some of my other classes before, you've heard me talk about the pencils with the numbers like 2B, HB, 6B. I do have a few of these because I just have them on hand, but they're not so important.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Wait a minute. Talk to me again.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I just have some erasers, pencil sharpener, nothing fancy today. You know, if you do want to pick up next time you're at the store, if you're ordering online, some of these little blending paper stumps, they're pretty inexpensive. You can get them in a little pack with different sizes. These are good for blending or smudging, but if you don't have this, you can use even a little piece of tissue paper or like Kleenex tissue or bath tissue kind of rolled up to smudge too, if you're wanting to shade. And the other thing I was going to mention too, I think flowers as a subject matter is just a really nice thing to practice drawing with because there's so many options of what you can do with them. You know, if you think of botanical prints and renderings, you could go color with these, you could watercolor them eventually, you could outline and pen on top of them, you could keep them simple little pencil drawings and doodles, you could shade them. So the process I'm going to show you today, it's not, you know, here's a little simple way how to doodle a sunflower, but more or less, how could I draw any kind of flower that I want to draw? Which then translates into how can I draw anything that I want to draw? Because it's very much the same. So the way I'm going to be kind of presenting and teaching today is a very, this is how you approach drawing versus kind of a step-by-step, this is how you create this cute little sunflower kind of a thing. And not that those are bad, those are great, but I think that just limits you so then you only feel like you know how to draw that one kind of sunflower, right? Whereas this sort of process is going to teach you and allow you to feel comfortable with anything that you want to draw. And like today, we'll kind of talk about some different types of flowers. And I have references that'll be on the camera with me so you can see an image while we're drawing together. But what I'm going to do really quickly is show you this website a minute. I've told some of you about this already, but this website is called unsplash.com. So I'm showing you this website because this is where I pull most of my reference photos from unless I take my own photo. But obviously we can't always travel to the places we want to go to take the reference photos ourselves. So this website is freely usable images. Creators put them on here for you to use. So for example, I might search flower. And when I search for flower, oops, I will get a whole, it's almost like Google Images, except for it's designed to be free for you to use, to draw from, to reference, all of that. So this is where I'll usually pull my reference photos from. And then as you can see, there's lots of beautiful photographs here, lots of options. You could be even more specific, like let's say you're looking for a poppy. And then you could search a specific type of flower too, and then search through that, or you can even look at the top and be a little bit more specific, or you can even do some little browsing, like they'll have textures and patterns, which I'll come here to find textures or pattern ideas for paintings or drawings. So I just wanted to show you this website just as a resource so that you know about it. And I can put a link to on our club homepage as well. So I will go ahead and go to my other camera. There we go. So if you have paper, go ahead and get it out, have it in front of you, grab some pencils, whatever you have. Like I said, I'm keeping it super simple today because I wanted to just give you some simple things that most people have. You know, if you like a challenge for yourself too, sometimes I'll draw in colored pencil instead of regular pencil just to bring some color into it and to give the added challenge of not being able to erase as easily, because sometimes that can be fun when you're learning to draw. But just for now, pencil and paper. And I kind of keep a little bin of a lot of my little printout flowers because I'll use these for paintings, and some of you have probably seen some of these before because I've done some classes with flowers, but I'll just kind of hang on to these for reference. But my thought is we can kind of use some, but I wanted to start with this little guy, because I think this is going to be kind of a nice, simple way for us to get started to kind of illustrate some of my points here. So, and I believe, Susan, you can probably correct me. Is this a tulip?
It looks like tulip leaves.
It's actually a tulip bulb. I mean, a bud.
Okay.
The leaves look like tulips.
That's what I
And it's
thought.
a bud.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I thought. Susan's our expert. I don't know all the proper flower names, so
yeah.
So color.
Is it not?
Botany.
Botany, yes. Which I think is fascinating. It's just not
Yeah.
something I know a ton about, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to start with this tulip because I think this illustrates nicely some basic shapes that we can break down, which is what I really want to illustrate. Because sometimes, let's say especially when we're looking at something like this looks pretty overwhelming, right? I mean, maybe if you're a really seasoned drawer, you feel like, I know how I would tackle that. Because when I look at something like this, my mind starts to go, well, how would I draw that? Where would I start? Where would I begin? What types of shapes could I break this down into? Whereas if I show this to my husband and asked him to draw this, a non-artist, he would be like, oh my goodness, that's overwhelming. I don't even know how I would begin to break this down. So if we start with something a little bit simpler, we can take the same idea and start to break down some shapes. So let's go ahead and best you can try to ignore, excuse my, I'm painting right now, so I've got lots of paint on my nails today. If you look at the back, try to ignore these leaves the best you can for now. Because part of drawing is learning with your own eye to try to block out things and see things all at the same time. And it's easier said than done, and it comes with practice, but just kind of keep that in mind. So we're gonna start kind of with this shape here. And so what I'll do on my paper, and you don't have to match the size or anything like that, but let's just focus on shapes and lines for right now. So I'm just gonna kind of even ignore some of the shapes inside and the lines inside, and I'm just gonna draw this. It's almost like a kind of teardrop shape. And you can keep your pencil nice and light, you can keep it loose. It's okay to let it overlap and go around. It's also okay if you don't like an area to erase it and sketch that line in a little bit better. But the goal here is just try to keep your pencil light and loose. You know, focus on your movement point of your wrist, but don't forget about your shoulder and your elbow. They move too. So allow those lines to kind of move as you're creating these strokes. So after I get something like this done, then I break it down into this stem. So I know that's just going to be some lines coming down. And then I can match that on the other side. Now, the other thing I'll mention about drawing flowers, if you ever keep flowers in your house or maybe have some in a garden or some potted flowers somewhere, I think drawing flowers from life is a very great thing to exercise as well. You know, pictures are awesome too, but seeing something in life, of course, we get to see the actual dimension in person, whereas this has already been flattened for me. So sometimes that can create some differences. So, and this of course just kind of goes straight. So I just try to pay attention to what those lines are doing. Like rather than this continuing to curve down, it goes straight because that leaf covers it. So I'm just gonna make that go straight and then just kind of bring this down to a point. Right, and pretty much I can look at this and say, yeah, that looks like that. That looks pretty close. So now before I start adding in these leaves, I'm just going to look a little bit closer at the actual kind of tulip bulb here and draw in this kind of middle curved line. Actually, I'm gonna erase this just a little bit. And it's okay, like I said, if you need to erase it, clean it up. I'm just gonna bring this little kind of line over, and these are kind of that crease of those petals. We see a little bit of that, and then it kind of goes over. And you don't have to worry about being so perfect because it is an organic thing. I'm just gonna find that top a little bit. Okay, and then I can see over here that this piece of this petal comes out this way. There we go. Now, a couple things I'll mention. Depending on what you, if you're drawing to sketch, if you're just drawing to paint, if you're drawing because you want to add color. If I'm sketching, sometimes what I will personally do is if I see that there's a darker value right here, because this is a completely yellow tulip, but it's dark yellow, medium yellow, light yellow, then there's a white highlight. You don't have to do this, but you could just kind of take some light kind of pencil strokes and you could kind of block in some of those values if you want to. You could keep it totally pencil lines with nothing on the inside, but sometimes just seeing a little bit of that texture even in a sketch can be sort of nice, or how this is darker back here. This is darker back here than it is up here. So sometimes I might kind of pencil that in, kind of up next to this crease a little bit where we start to see that flower fold. It's a little bit darker. And doing this, what we're doing here is we're observing, we're looking, we're recording the information we're seeing. There's actually been studies that show that drawing is one of the best tools for learning. You know, we sort of have put it into this, you know, only so many people can draw, or you can only draw well if you're an artist. But the truth is what we're doing here is we're observing, we're looking, we're learning, we're seeing, we're recording information. And the more you do this, the better you will get at it. So yeah, that's kind of just something I like to do. Sometimes just give my, you know, this doesn't have to be a fully rendered sketch by any means, but sometimes just putting in a little bit of graphite can be kind of lovely. You could even do the same thing down here in the stem. Just kind of add just a little bit of graphite, just a little bit of value. And then we can look at these leaves. These leaves I think are fun because we get to play around with folds, which folds can seem sort of, or curves, and when we see the inside of something and the outside edge kind of going around seems sort of confusing, and how do we approach that, and how do we get that looking like that? But really it's just a series of lines that we have to create. So let's go ahead and start with this one right here, the leaf closest. And I just kind of look at this line and I notice where it's hitting here. And I'm not striving for total accuracy in my drawing today. It's more or less just getting kind of the basic information here. But I can just sort of have this leaf start to go up then on the side here. And then I just kind of look, how high does it go? Almost to that petal or the tip. And then I notice it starts to curve around, but then I see two lines. So it curves around once, but then I see a little bit of that back edge come around too. So then from here, I can just start bringing this down. And what happens is this line will just run right into my stem. So I can let that run right into it. And again, if you have to erase because an angle's a little bit off, or that's totally fine. You can erase if you need to, or sometimes I'll just draw over top of my incorrect line just to make it look a little bit more sketchy. That's fine too. And then I'll just bring this little edge down. And then I notice it hits this next leaf, right? So when it hits this next leaf, I can go ahead and just put a line in here to illustrate where it's going to hit this leaf. And then I know that this one starts to come down with it and is going to run right into here. When you draw this way, you'll also notice things will start to connect. They'll start to hook together because you're observing and you're drawing what you see. The other thing I'll say is sometimes if something looks funny or if you feel like, oh, it shouldn't look that way, don't fight it. Draw what you see. I think that's the most important thing. So this one here, this little petal kind of comes up. I see kind of a little point on the end. Put that in. And then bring this down. And just what I do is I'm kind of following the curve or the line with my eye, or the line with my eye is what I should say, is I watch for those little curves or those little variations, how it gets a little wider right here, but it's a little thinner here. Those are some kind of tips to check for accuracy. You know, and sometimes I'll have to go back and erase because no, I actually started making it thinner here, but it needs to be thicker here. So little things like that will just kind of help you improve some of your accuracy as far as when you're drawing from a reference. But then sometimes we can go off of the reference and change it too, and that's totally fine. Especially with something like a flower, no two flowers are the same. So now at this point with these leaves, if it's starting to look a little confusing for you, because sometimes our eyes have trouble seeing depth when there's nothing but lines there, right? There's no shadow like there is here to allow me to see this depth, because value helps create space and depth in a drawing. So I could do a similar idea where I took a little bit of that shading and I could like really right in here, this is the darkest part in the entire image. So if I wanted to, I could just kind of put a little bit more heavy pressure, kind of fill some of this in a little bit. Again, this is totally optional. If you want to do some of this little shading, you don't have to, but it does help our eye, like I said, make sense of some of this space, because it's difficult to do sometimes with just lines. But it is possible. You can also think about, if you look closely at kind of these leaves, how there's almost like lines, like these vertical lines kind of going up. Some are darker, some are lighter. You could even take a sharper pencil and just kind of mimic some of those lines going up the leaf. And then when you add shading over top, that line will just kind of show through a little bit. You can also shade, and then you could erase some of the line work a little bit to do kind of like a subtractive method. So I like to just give lots of ideas and things, because I never want anyone to feel like their art has to look just like mine or just like someone else's, because it doesn't. You know, the process is similar, but you can kind of have freedom and control over how you want to render it. And then let's take a look at this leaf kind of back here a minute, and then we can try another flower. But this one I would just kind of start, notice it comes down. So I draw like a little part down here, and then it continues on the other side. And then I just kind of follow this line, how it sort of curves a little bit. And then it's almost like a little triangle, like a thin little triangle. That's why I just try to break it down into shapes, basic shapes as much as I can. I feel like most anything can be broken down into at least like a distorted basic shape. So I think about like this curve because I was following this line here. And then I know I can just kind of connect this coming down here to kind of mimic this shape. And again, mine looks a little bit different shape-wise, but you know, that's okay. I like to stylize when I draw a lot anyways and kind of make it my own, but just kind of using my reference as a basic starting point. But this kind of from here kind of goes down, and then you notice you see a line kind of coming up here too. I'm actually drawing on the picture so you can see it a little bit better. And I can draw this going up, hits this line. And then from here, I mean, I could draw some of these little lines kind of going back in here. I could kind of bring like a little shading into this background a little bit if I wanted to. You could even do some kind of hatching or kind of, sometimes when I sketch, I just like to scribble my shading just because it's kind of expressive and fun. So I'll just kind of move my pencil all around and just kind of fill it in that way. It's just a matter of preference. So play around with different shading styles too. So let's go ahead, we'll try another one. Maybe we'll look at some of these daisies. I feel like daisies are kind of nice. I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit here. So I have this image of all these different kind of daisies. And daisies I think can be fun because you can make them really realistic looking, or you can stylize them and make them kind of fun and whimsical, or they work well as little doodles. And I even have like these little black micron pens. Sometimes I'll just do little doodles of kind of daisy shapes and then put little watercolor in with them or something. So that can be kind of fun too, as a little extension. Now I've done it before like this, where I'll just draw whole bunches of flowers like on one page. And here's like an orchid I drew just of mine, where I'll put it on a separate page and date it. So it's kind of up to you. You could continue drawing on the same page, or you could flip to the back or a new page, you know, whatever you want to do. Let's take a look at some of these. Pencil. So I think these daisies are fun because they just go in all different directions, right? So how I approach a daisy is I look at the center of it first, and I start by just drawing that. So we can even do like kind of a couple together. So we could do one kind of like this, where we're seeing like a pretty like big amount of the circle. Where we can do one like this, where we're seeing like, where it looks like this, where it's rounded on the top and more flat on the bottom. And then you could do one like this, where it's kind of like you've got an oval off to the side, and then the stem's kind of coming from the back of it. And then we'll draw the petals going that way. So that's kind of how I would approach like a daisy or a flower similar to a daisy. Something where there's like a center and petals shooting out from it, and that, you know, they can go in different directions. So that's what I look for first, is like, what's that middle look like? So a couple things you can do with like a daisy is, depending on how accurate you want to be, you can actually like count the petals and make sure you put the same amount of petals you see here, here. That's of course going to be the most accurate way to do it. If you're not into that and you just want to be more expressive and you just don't care so much, then you can just kind of look at it as more of a loose shape, which would be something like this, where I could almost draw out where it's bigger. And I could almost give myself like a little guide to follow. Okay, and then from in this little guide, what I would do then is just fill it with petals. And this is what I would do if I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna count it. I'm still gonna look at it, but I'm not gonna count how many are actually there. It's the same thing when drawing like someone smiling with teeth. I always tell my students, count how many teeth you actually see, because if you only see 4 but you draw 8, it's going to look kind of funny. So, but with flowers, I think it's a little bit different. You can be a little bit looser with it. So I don't think it's, you know, you always have to count them all. But yeah, drawing these little guides can be really helpful. But then when we look at the front, we have something, what's happening here, and I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. But what is happening here, notice how we see these petals, they're a lot taller in the back, but they look really short and tiny here, even though they're not short and tiny. They're the exact same length as these in the back, but they don't look like that. That's called foreshortening. So we have to draw them in a way that they appear that they're going back in space. So something like this, you just draw it as you see it. Draw them like they look tiny, even though they're not tiny. And then when we start to add the rest of our petals and we start to add a little bit of shading to it, it doesn't look so funny anymore. But that's just, foreshortening is something that happens when we see things from different angles or perspectives based on our eye level. And so that could be like if I'm pointing my finger directly toward you, the view you're seeing right now is foreshortened because it appears as my arm is shorter than it really is. So anything kind of coming directly toward you or like at an angle will appear that way. Just kind of pay attention to the shapes at the edges. Do they kind of tip down a little bit? Are they straight? I feel like when you start drawing from observation, you just start seeing the world differently. Anytime I go for a walk or I'm looking at a sunset or just, you know, a pretty view in nature, I'm always thinking about how would I draw that? How would I paint that? What shape am I seeing? And it just changes the way you look at things, which I think is really fun. And especially when you draw this way and you're learning how to break down shapes. So like a little something like that. Then I can kind of look at this and say, you know what? I need to fill this out a little bit more. Kind of looks like it was coming from the back. Then I can bring that stem in here. I've got this little part that kind of jets out a little bit. You know, I'm just kind of put these little and a triangle points on the end. Bring that back in. And then from here, if I did a guide, like what I did here, I might just erase that now. Okay, so that can be something that's helpful for you. You can kind of take it or leave it. But let's say I want to bring in some more definition. This is a pretty simple looking flower at this point, where there's more detail here. So this is where I would, you know, kind of look back in the center. I see this kind of dot in the center. So I'm going to put that dot in there. And then I notice how kind of around this yellow kind of the center here, there's almost like these dark little dots that are kind of adding some shadow in there. So I'm going to put that in too. Where I might just kind of draw around this. I could kind of round this out a little bit, that yellow portion, if I don't like the shape so much. So you can change things too as you're drawing. Just kind of fill this in. You know, my line's a little bit thicker up here, so I could erase this a little bit if I want it to be a little thinner. I tend to draw just a little heavy-handed and thicker and more expressive because I feel like I draw like I paint. Whereas some people tend to like to have all these neat little crisp lines. So I just say embrace your style. Whatever way you're drawing is great. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at one of these other views. So I've got this guy now. Should be something like this. Just gonna fold that. Now, you know, me personally, I would maybe like to see some more petals kind of in here. So this could be a good example of how we could add something to a reference photo, because you can add things too. I mean, you don't have to make it identical to this photo. This is just a starting point. So I'll approach this just a little bit differently. I'm actually gonna put the stem in first this time. And just kind of put this bottom, kind of little bottom piece here. And then goes down into the stem. Now this, not entirely sure what this is, maybe like part of a leaf or something, but we don't have to put that in if we don't want to. But I might start with some of these bigger petals on the side is probably where I would start with this one. So I kind of come to the side here. Notice it starts out a little bit further. So I kind of start putting those in here. Kind of get a little bit wider. And same kind of idea. You could count them so you get that exact number. Or you can just kind of start filling in the two sides. So I do my two edges first, just so I can create some balance. We're just doing kind of these little slender shapes. They're just kind of stacked. Actually, I'm starting to make mine a little too wide, I think. Getting excited. Tone it down just a little bit. There we go. That looks better. And then the same kind of thing is starting to happen where we see some foreshortening here where it comes around the edge. So you can kind of approach that the same way. You just kind of start bringing these around, and I am making mine up just a little bit too. So you can just kind of add these like little shorter petals in. You could even, here, I'm gonna actually erase this so I can show you a little bit better. Redraw this in here. So this petal, and I'm gonna draw it big so you can see what I'm talking about. This is itty bitty. So what this petal's doing is it's going up, over, and then it's folding. And then the fold comes up to about here, and then we're seeing the back of it. Oops, there we go. So that's essentially what this is happening right here, okay? So if we have a shape kind of like this, we can just kind of, let me erase this a little bit better so we can see it. Okay, so if I've got something like this, and I notice that this shape goes up over top of the yellow. So I can kind of start it right here, bring it up over top of the yellow, do that little curve, and bring it around and back down to get that little shape. Okay, so this little shape, the same idea here. And then there's another one just like that over here, where it's kind of curved, and then you see kind of the sides come down. Okay, and I'm drawing them purposely like really dark and outliney so you can see them really well on the screen. Typically when I'm sketching, my line is gonna look a lot more like this, or like this is going to be really, really light, but I just wanna make sure you can see it on the screen, okay? So same kind of thing with the back. I can start bringing these petals into the back. Now, I don't see any over here, but I could add them in if I wanted to. And they could almost kind of appear like they're folded if you wanted them to, or you could kind of expand them and bring them out a little bit bigger. So I'll show you what that would look like. And I could do some little ones kind of in here to build this up. But then I just continue to kind of layer them, build them up. I can do the same sort of thing where I see some of those little black edges in here a little bit. I could do a little shading on here if I wanted to. But that's kind of the gist of that. These guys look kind of a little funny because I drew them so dark in there, but I just wanted you to get that sense of that shape because that can be sort of different the way when it folds like that. All right, so let's take a look at this one kind of going to the back, and then I thought maybe we could try drawing like a rose together because I feel like roses sometimes are a little tricky, like how do I build that up? So looking at the back, which we kind of started, and that's this one. I'll just draw an arrow. You can see I'm talking about this one. So I'm kind of seeing this ovally shape. I'm seeing the stem come out from the back, which I could then bring this down if I wanted to. I do see just a little bit of that yellow where it's kind of loose. So maybe I do kind of like a little loose wavy line around that. And of course, this one is a little, you know, blurry, but we still get the gist of the shape. And then, you know, and this, I'll kind of show you this too. This might be helpful for some of you if you draw just lines to begin. So I could start by just drawing my petals kind of as simple lines. And then after I do them as lines, I can bulk them up. Okay, so that might be helpful too. Try just kind of playing with that shape a little bit. And if it's helpful, you can draw yourself a little guide like we did before where you're just kind of going around and saying, okay, all my petals need to hit this line. That's totally fine. You know, guides are always acceptable. You've probably, if you've watched drawing tutorials before, you'll see artists that regularly do that and some that don't. There's also a really helpful method too, drawing with a grid. If any of you have ever tried drawing with a grid, if you're finding proportions are challenging for you. And I can even show you how to grid something that you just print yourself. Yeah, I just kind of build up these petals from here. You know, think about how we're seeing some in the background too. And for me, I would have fun painting these. You could get out your gouache paint and bring some color into them, would be really fun. They could be very illustrative if you wanted them to be. You could make a card for someone. But then, you know, I just think about kind of all those little details, all those little extra shapes that you see. You know, you could shade this all in because it is dark. And if you kind of move your pencil around, like in a little circular motion, this is called scumbling. This is a really nice way to get a soft area of value without seeing lots of pencil lines. It's just a nice little scumble, and I can show you it here too. It's just little circles, really soft. So then you're not seeing the like strokes of the pencil when you shade back and forth, or cross hatching. So you can kind of play around too with that to see what you like. But if you were going to grid something, like let's say you wanted to draw this flower, but you wanted help with proportions, you could just take a ruler. And what I would do is you can do just a super simple grid like this where I'll draw on my paper directly, and I'll basically just divide it like this. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing on my paper. I'll make a grid on my paper, and I'll even just kind of show you this. Okay, so I've got that gridded. Then I do the same thing here. I take my ruler. Take my ruler. Draw a little grid for myself. So you don't have to do a full huge grid. Like if you Google or if you look up Chuck Close, the artist Chuck Close, if you've ever heard of him, he does fabulous, hyper realistic drawings and paintings of people in massive, huge, big as walls. And he's in a wheelchair too. So he has this cool like lift that they lift him up. But anyway, everything he does is on a grid. So that's how he gets everything so accurate, is because he grids it. So if
What was his last name?
Close, C-L-O-S-E, Chuck Close.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So then what you would do is you just kind of look at your image, you look at your grid, and I would say, okay, I'm going to match. You're basically matching. And you're just making sure, like, I'm working in quadrants. So everything I see in this quadrant, I match. Everything I see in this quadrant, I match. And then you just work quadrant by quadrant. And that can really, really help with proportions if you find that's hard for you. I definitely, if I'm doing like a big drawing of a person or something, I like grids. They help me big time because I tend to be really loose and expressive. So if I'm doing something more controlled and more realistic, it helps me make sure things are aligned. Because if you've ever seen a picture of someone you know, but something slightly off, it's very noticeable. So let's go ahead and just try a rose a minute, because I think roses, well, at least my students think they're really intimidating, but I think they're not that difficult to draw because they're lots of breaking down of shapes. I think I thought I had a nice, one of mine is kind of little, but it'll work. This guy. Like I had a really big option or big version and a small version of it. So I can, maybe the bigger version's easier for you all to see if I have both of them here. So taking a look at something like this, a rose, where we're seeing all these different folds. It's all the same color, so we're differentiating where we have a darker kind of, and even this is light, but you know, the darkest value of this rose, so we can find all those areas. So that's what I usually do when I start looking at something. I start to look at where all the darks fall, where the medium values fall, and then where's the highlight. So I know based on this photo that the light is directly above. And I know that because that's where all the highlight is. And as we move away, it starts to get a little bit darker. So that's something I tend to look for when I'm starting to look at an image to draw from, is I pick out all those things. If you're drawing in pencil too, it can sometimes be helpful to print in black and white so you don't have to worry about the color component. But let's go ahead. I'm gonna actually leave this so you can see this shape a little bit better. I'll kind of look at this one. So where do we start? What line should I draw first on this? This is crazy, right? There's so much to look at here. What do I draw first? For me, it's obvious the line I would draw first, and it is this one right here. I knew that the first second I looked at this rose, that's what I would start with. And it's because I've done this so many times, is I've looked at things and have broken them down. And to me, this piece right here is the biggest petal. So if I put this in first, it's going to be easy for me to build the rest of these shapes around this piece. So that's kind of why I pick the first thing to draw. Your first thing can be different than mine. There's no right rule for that. But I'm going to start kind of with this little fold. So I'm going to start just kind of a diagonal line going up. Don't worry if that angle's perfect. That does not matter. Our rose can evolve from this one. And then I just kind of mimic this little shape where it's kind of just going down and it goes back up. So there's the start to my rose. That's it. Okay, so it's just picking out something simple to start with. Then, what does it connect to? Well, it kind of goes down from here, and there is a little piece right through here I can draw in here. Okay, so this kind of keeps going. He stops about here, and then I'm seeing another piece kind of on top here. And again, I'm, letting mine be a little bit more whimsical than what I'm seeing on my image, but I'm doing that purposefully. So then from here, now I've got the top of this. It's pretty close, okay. So then maybe I'll bring this line in right here, where this kind of goes around, down, and then out. Now, anyone just looking at this would not see a rose. It doesn't look like a rose yet, but we're getting there, we're building it. So then, after I've got this little guy, this is an easy line right here to just close that off, right? I know that goes right here. That's pretty simple. So for some people, the next step, they might like to do this petal. Some people might want to hop back over here and do this one. The choice is yours, really. I think I'll go ahead and do this one and get that side kind of in, because that'll be, I think, a nice kind of foundation. So I'm going to take this line, it'll be kind of diagonal. And if you feel like as you're drawing new lines that you need to erase an old line you made, do it. That's fine. It is totally okay to go back and erase. Or you can choose to not erase and to just roll with it. And that's fine too. It's whatever your mood for the day is, I think. Then this is a little tricky to see, but this is almost kind of like a triangle shape right here. There is a little bit of another color, but I'm just gonna kind of illustrate it with a loose little triangle down through here. Then I'm going to build the rest of this rose kind of on this side, where there's another triangle piece here. Got lots of triangles in roses. And then this is a triangle piece. It just kind of goes out. And then here's another little triangle piece. Put that in here. And then I can just kind of bring this out to the end. And again, still doesn't quite look like a rose yet, but it's getting there. Because if you look at this, the shapes I have here, they're the same shapes that are here, right? We're still building it up. So now I'm gonna go over here to this side and start working on this one over here. So I'm gonna just bring in the bottom a little bit. It kind of comes up. Now it might be helpful to actually, I haven't drawn any of the stem or leaves or anything yet. So it actually may be helpful for me to put this green part in, which kind of comes from right here and then goes up over to here. And then I do see another loose little green spot in the back. All right, and then from here, I'm going to bring this green part down. And then I'm going to draw it side where it comes up. And then I'm getting into where I'm seeing the petal now against the leaf because it folds over top of the leaf. So if I'm here on the leaf, I will go ahead and I'm going to just draw myself a little bit more of this petal going upward so I can make sense of that. And then it almost has like a little slit right here, kind of goes in and then back out. And then we see it kind of come this way. And this is doing one of those little folds. Okay, so it's kind of looping around right here. So I'll bring that green part up. Okay, and then I can just see this little fold. And I will tell you, if you're feeling lost too, or it's okay. It will take practice to feel confident and comfortable. It happens with time. And then this line, I'm just gonna kind of follow this back. And I can break this down into a shape where I see it separate from this darker tone to a highlight. So that's how I know a line can go here. I do have a class this week on contour drawing. And if you were a beginner drawer, I highly recommend signing up for that class. I want to say it's Tuesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. It will improve your drawing so much. Some of the little activities I'll have you do seem a little funny, but they help so much. So I'm just kind of mimicking this shape, bringing this up. Now, my petals are probably going to go off of my page a little bit, but that's okay. Now, when you look at this, it's starting to look a little bit more like a rose. We're starting to get there. Now, here's an example of something I noticed I did. See this shape and this shape? I don't have them connecting, but they actually connect. So here's a great example of when I could just erase this first shape I made and then just make it a little bit bigger. That's okay. There, problem solved. Actually, I think it looks better bigger. So now that I've got kind of this little side piece in, I can do this little fold that comes around the top. And then I can bring this down. But hopefully you can kind of get the idea of how we're building here and how we're putting all these shapes together to create the bigger image. So from here, you could kind of do these side pieces. You could start going up toward the back, which I think I'm going to start going up toward the back just because we only have a little bit of time left. At least we want to get it looking somewhat more like a rose. You can draw this piece in the back, and then I notice that this piece overlaps it a little bit. And I will also say, if you can print a picture and actually sometimes drawing over top of it, just tracing, helps you learn shape. It helps you, and then you can translate that to paper. So tracing sometimes has its place as a learning tool to see shapes. And then this kind of comes down here. And then I've got this piece that kind of comes up. This, I think, is where we start to really get that sense of the rose, right? Because it's that kind of all these pieces wrapping around to that center. So this piece is really, really important here. So I know it kind of comes up from here. See that little back piece a little bit. Another little triangle. And we're starting to see that shape more. It's starting to come together. So, I mean, truthfully, I could spend, another 25 minutes on this, getting all my shapes, rendering it, working on it. I tend to be a slightly slower drawer anyway, unless I'm doing really fast gesture sketches, just because I like to take my time. I like to study. I like to look at shapes. So yeah, I do want to stop though for a minute because I want to make sure I have time for your questions that you may have, troubleshooting, tips, anything like that, because I think even though I didn't quite finish this, you still kind of get the idea. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see